Okay, so welcome to everyone once again, and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to the Geneva Business School Industry Insights. Today's session will be on leadership in investing and decision making with Alexandria Fisk. Alexandria is the COO at Casdin Capital, and prior to this, she ran her own consultancy business working with technology companies as an advisor on strategy and advancing performance. Alex, the floor is all yours. Enjoy, everyone.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much for taking the time today. Hopefully, I am going to be able to give you some insight into my career path and how I see some things in the world, and hopefully it helps you on your journey. So I'm just, one second, my screen. There we go. Has that changed? Perfect. So this is the overview for today. There's going to be 3 parts. We're going to start on my career and how decision making has been a key part to my success. We're going to think about the concept of leadership, how that has worked for me and how that comes through in my role as a COO. And then we're going to get to the business of investing, which is what I spend the majority of my time doing now. And we're going to have Q&A at the end of each section to make sure that we get through everything. Okay, so who am I? I'm Alex. In the day, I'm the COO at Casdin Capital, which is a life science investment firm. I was born in the UK originally. I moved to the States when I was 25. I'm married to an Australian, and I became a US citizen around 7 years ago. So I think of myself as international, and I was very, very grateful to obviously have such an international crowd here today. I don't like talking about myself, so this is all a little bit uncomfortable up front, but I am very, very proud of the work I've done in my career. And I think that if I can ever do anything to help others learn from my experience, then I think that's very, very powerful. And that puts me in a very lucky position. So thank you for taking the time today. I included some words here that I think put me in my best light, as I think it's really important that you get to know me as quickly as possible so you can understand me and the decisions that I've made. Because I think the lens that we apply to life is actually the one that's really important to understand for decision making. So, hardworking, committed, thoughtful, conscientious, commercial, problem solver, hardworking, easygoing and driven, warm, determined, enabling, motivated, growth-minded, hardworking, generous, open, intelligent, inquisitive, and empathetic. Now, as you can hear, I said hardworking 3 times. I think that if you work hard, I think good things happen. Working hard doesn't mean that things are guaranteed by any stretch, but I do think for me personally it's been a critical part of my success, and it shouldn't be overlooked. Effort really does go a long way in what you do. I think the other thing, and probably the most important takeaway for today for everybody, is that you do have to believe in yourself. Your success is owned by you, and you have to believe in what's possible. I didn't become a COO overnight. It's taken 20 years and a lot of hard work to get here. I think that I can honestly say, as we're going to go through, there's been some pivotal points in my journey where decisions have enabled me to get here. There's been some luck. There's been some hard knocks. There's been a lot on the journey. But I've believed all the way along that I can do what I want to do. And I think that that's critical for your ultimate success in whatever you choose to do. So I made this, I'll admit, last night, and I've been really enjoying thinking back through some of my experiences. So hopefully I can walk you through it and tell you what I think is interesting and might be applicable and helpful for you guys. So the big picture, to again for context, is I spent a decade working at a large blue chip finance company. I had multiple jobs within that company, but again, UBS was my home for 10 years. Education has been often a stepping stone to change for me. So we'll walk through some of my decisions about the different education points that I've had. I've spanned different industries. So I've obviously started in finance, moved into tech, created a cider company, created a consulting company. Now I'm in an investment firm. Not many people have probably spanned as many industries in 20 years. And the different sizes of companies is also something that's quite interesting when I speak to people. So large company, like 2 people company, building a consultancy where you're everything. So I think there's some interesting things there to cover. And I want to also obviously think through this in the context of decision making. So that might be helpful for you guys as you go through your journeys. All right, so let's clue into the decisions. So first off, Nottingham University, my home for 3 years, had a wonderful experience. However, it was 2002 when I graduated, which most of you may not fully remember, but it was a pretty nasty time in the markets, the job markets in particular. We were going through quite a big recession in the UK. So it was quite hard to get a job. So I sort of got a backdoor job at UBS, and it was within the finance function. And really, it was within the FP&A department, which I'm sure most of you would understand if you've worked within larger organizations. But we were in charge of all of the financial reporting, particularly sort of management accounting, and the numbers that would help the business make decisions. It was the only job I could get when I graduated. I hadn't done any internships. I'd chosen to go and do a marine conservation project the previous summer for 3 months. I lived in Fiji and dove 3 times a day. So I'd had priorities that probably hadn't aligned to huge success in my job search leaving university. However, I again got sort of the back door in. It was a fully paid job. And what was really interesting, within about 6 weeks of me joining, I got pulled into a project working directly for the CFO of all of UBS. I joined the investment banking division, which at the time had about 20,000 people. UBS at the time had about 350,000 people because of the wealth management side of the business. So that really within 8 weeks of working ever, I started working with this a preeminent CFO on a transaction. So I got first-hand experience very, very early in my career. And I worked on that project for about 6 months. And I would say the exposure was incredible. It was a very fast learning curve. There were huge decisions that were being made. And really, I was there to support somebody in providing data, which was being used directly for decision making. What was also really fun was actually getting to know a Swiss company. I didn't appreciate until I worked for a Swiss company about how deeply rooted the Swiss culture was in the company. And I really enjoyed it. Everything to me was very straightforward. It ran efficiently. The culture to me was fabulous. I also got to experience the London working culture, which involved going to the pub and really enjoying people. So again, the first 3 years for me were in London working for UBS. I worked on a number of different strategic projects and strategic planning initiatives, and I got to work with many of the decision makers across the bank, which again, I don't think I could have ever dreamed it would have such a big impact in my long-term career. I'd had no idea at the time it would. But I think I was great. I was laying foundations without even knowing it at that point. And whilst I was doing that job, which was quite an intense job, I was also doing my CIMA qualification. So I joined, that at the time was 3 years and 27 exams, which I did outside of my day job. So that was really the start of everything. And after about 3 years, I'd worked on many different things, and I was starting to get itchy feet, as is often the case. And I started looking on the internet at the different jobs that I could potentially get within UBS, because I still really liked UBS. And there were some jobs in Sydney that I was quite interested in. And there was this job in, I think, Singapore. But I was talking to one of my internal clients, because that was a key part to my role. And they were talking about this really hard problem that they had in Stamford. Stamford is in Connecticut, which is about 45 minutes away from New York, which was where UBS had the biggest trading floor in the world at the time. And he was bemoaning about how he had this huge project to do, and he just wasn't sure how he was going to get it done. And I sort of subtly said, well, I've been thinking about the fact I might be able to move somewhere else. And I mean, it does sound like a hard project. What's someone going to need to be successful in that role? And within about a week, he'd pretty much offered me a job and the opportunity to move to America for a year to work on this project. It was an awful project. So it really was. The role was to convince every trader on the fixed income side of the business to sign paperwork around the Sarbanes-Oxley legislation. So the start of the project was for me to read the 672 pages of the Sarbanes-Oxley legislation. I had to understand and work out how it would apply to each of the trading desks. So I had to understand what each of the trading desks did. I had to work with audit teams, compliance teams, regulators. There was no one else on my team based in the US. And really what the headline of that would probably be that it was a huge change project. So it was really my first foray into change management and trying to convince somebody to do something they may not want to do. And traders in fixed income on a large trading floor were very, very intimidating. And it was a hard job. But I made wonderful relationships. And that was really what I learned in that role, was the only way I was going to get this done was to spend time with people to understand what their concerns were and to work through those concerns and be consistent and just show up and be thoughtful and work out how we got there, because there was no option not to get to the sort of end that had been set. So I did that for a year. And then I was lucky enough to sort of, within the same team, be put onto a new project that allowed me to start spending more time in New York, because the reverse commute, working trading floor hours, was definitely not my first choice. So I was getting on a train at 5:55 every morning to get to the trading floor by 7 o'clock, to then leave the trading floor at 7 o'clock every night. So it was an intense time, but a very, very fun time. There was a bar cart on the train if you got the 6:52 train back into the city, and there was a large group of people who used to try and get that together. So there was never a dull moment on that train home. So I was assigned to a couple more projects, doing some really interesting work, and the financial crisis hit. And I was put into a team to work on troubleshooting the financial crisis for UBS. I was a junior person on the team, so I really was sort of cold face at watching some really, really hard decision making. UBS on the first quarter that we recorded it had a $51 billion loss, which was the largest loss in history at that time. So it was quite stressful. And the things that sort of then carried on, I saw the best and worst of decision making in people. The worst decision that was made was they fired the person who had been in charge of the mortgages division, who had been continuously asked to build this book of business, which obviously then became worth a lot less than it should have been. And that person knew everything about that business and was a real industry veteran. And by taking him out of the mix, we now had less information, which was still to this day is a decision I've never fully understood, but I think it was one of those classic, you have to have a scapegoat, so they decided it was him. It's probably one of the decisions I've agreed with least in my career. The next awful decision was that they decided to fire 80% of the team who had been working on the products that had caused the loss. Again, with all of that loss, meant so much knowledge was leaving the organization. And then we ultimately spun that set of assets off into a different division that was sold to the Swiss bank, the Swiss government. And then ultimately it all worked out very, very well. I sometimes joke that I have PTSD from that time period, because it was 18-hour days, and it was a very stressful time for everybody that was interacting with us. So we were causing so much change, and we were causing a lot of anxiety in many people, which is a very hard position to be in, particularly when you're really just the person in the room providing the spreadsheets, which, honestly, at that time, that is what you are. So when that project started to wrap up, I got offered a position moving to the exchange traded derivatives team, where we were just about to buy an asset from, at the time, I think it was ABN AMRO. And that was a crazy project, because we had our own exchange traded derivatives team and platform. So we had 350 people and a massive technology infrastructure, and we basically bought the same from another bank. And the purchase was based on the fact that we believed their client base was strong and their technology was stronger. When you then lined it up, I was part of the team that had to work out which technology we were going to keep, which people we were going to keep, and how we were going to make two sets of 350 people become one set of 400 people. So that was an interesting 2-year program. There was a tremendous cultural clash of the two companies, and ultimately I think we ended up with 450 people. We stuck with the original UBS technology. A lot of the clients left. It was a really, really challenging program of work, and one which, again, I learned incredible amount about, but that was a challenging program. It was deemed as a success. I'm not sure if I would have given it such high marks. I then went on to work for the head of the prime brokerage business, where I really sort of became a chief of staff. And in that role, I haven't been clicking along, sorry. In that role, I actually started to learn the hedge fund business and understood sort of the role of cap intro. And I worked on a program with Prime Brokerage and the rest of the bank to try and look at how we could optimize what we gave to our hedge fund clients, because they were often underserviced because we weren't looking at them holistically across the whole bank. And the last role I took on when I was at UBS was to be the COO of the macro research division. So I worked directly for the chief economist and strategist at the time, Larry Hathaway, who was an incredibly brilliant man. And my job was to really make everything work for him. So we had 140 economists and strategists, and my job was to make sure we had the best technology, that we could push the best products out to our clients, we had the best client commercial and client strategy, that the rest of the bank understood what we did, that we had the best information going to the right people at the right times, and that we stayed within all of the compliance rules we needed to. And that was a great role. But after 10 years of being in a huge organization, I was really looking to try and have a bigger impact. And I was convinced I could. So I actually started a master's in integrated marketing at NYU, as I thought marketing was something that had been interesting to me. And really the focus on that master's was digital marketing and sort of the future of marketing, which I hadn't learned much about at an investment bank, as you can imagine. That sort of education started to open some doors, and I got introduced to the CEO of Return Path, an incredibly smart man, and got offered a role to join them. They didn't really know what to do with me, and that was my first sort of experience, and one I would sort of say is really important for people to understand. If you come out of a huge organization and you're looking at a smaller organization, often people sort of go, I don't really understand what you did or how that works. Because in a smaller organization, the functions and the specialties are normally so much more clear. So I joined really as the sort of right hand to the head of sales and services. Within about a year, I was really I was the general manager of the largest product within the organization. And I think it's height, I think I had about 350 people. It was nearly $100 million product. And I spent a large portion of my time working with the product and engineering teams to try and think of a sort of a longer term sort of product evolution. So I spent a tremendous amount of time personally working on understanding product management, product development, product market fit, product marketing, and just found that unbelievably interesting. And I built on a lot of the things I'd done before in the investment bank around thinking about client profitability and client service, and sort of matching what you have as an offering to what somebody needs. So really the client experience. And we completely changed the service offering that we provided, the cost structure of that, the revenue structure around that, and created a sales enablement program, and all the things. So I would say at that point, I really felt I understood how to run a high growth, medium-sized business. I knew how to work within a large organization. And yet that seemed to not be enough. So in my spare time, my husband and I started so as I was coming to the end at NYU, to wrap up that master's, we needed to do a case study. So you had to create your own business. And we had been joking about creating a cider business or a brewery or something for a year or two, as my husband was a hobbyist brewer and cider maker. And I sort of went, oh look, it's 12 weeks of my life. Let's do the numbers. Let me put the effort in and model this one out. I would always, as I've mentioned 3 times probably in my talk already, I like to be social. So doing a project on alcohol consumption, on the trends within the alcohol market didn't sound too hard. I did the work. We actually found a space to actually sort of cost out how the business model would work. And by the end of that module, we'd actually put a deposit down on the space and decided we were going to start the business. So that was the beginning of Descendant Cider. It was hard at first because we both had full-time jobs. About 6 months in, my husband sort of went down to part-time and then very quickly to full-time. And we always ran with a skeleton crew, but we made that a really exciting and successful business. We sold in Whole Foods. We sold all over New York. And we had quite an amazing sort of product line, which often won awards. So sort of everything you could hope for really from a small business. Whilst I was doing Descendant, I also decided I wanted to continue to keep my hand in the sort of the game I'd been in all that time, and started working with a couple of companies that I'd known people from, and some of the engagements were very small, and it was really just sort of executive coaching or sort of I'd call it sort of performance work with individuals. And then someone would say, "Oh, you know, we've got this massive problem with our product group. Could you come and like troubleshoot it and see what you think you might recommend?" So I'd sort of pop in and start doing something, and then I'd do another project that was a bit bigger, and they might offer me a job, and then I'd say, "I'm not really interested in a job. I've got too much going on." And I worked with 35 different companies over 4 years. Every single engagement was additive, interesting, and helped me learn so much, both about business and people. And one of my clients on this journey happened to be Kasdan Capital. I actually started working with them for 5 hours a week. The scope of the work was to just help them with their research process, in formalizing what they were already doing some tweaks to what they were doing, making sure it worked with the systems they had. So it was a really light engagement. It built and got traction, as you'd probably call it. And in the summer of 2019, the CIO at the time, Eli, said, "I've really enjoyed the work we've done on the research side. I'd love to see what might be possible if you joined us full time and you worked on the full business." So we sort of came to an agreement, and I gradually said goodbye to my clients and came on full time at the beginning of 2020. I think I actually forgot to mention I also became a mum whilst I was doing that consultancy work, which obviously adds a different component, which I obviously wanted to mention because not that many women are able to do it all. I'm not sure I do and can do it all, but definitely giving it my best shot. And that's really my career journey. I'm sure I've missed out lots of things that were probably more interesting than what I just shared, but it was a wild ride, and I've got the wrinkles to prove it. So when I was sort of taking a step back and thinking about my decisions in my career, I started to sort of think about what had been important for me to consider. And I think risk tolerance and risk is the first place to think of when you're making big decisions. Assessing risk is something that I think is critical to good decisions. And I think that a lot of people have lower risk tolerance than they think they have. So knowing and understanding your risk tolerance is really important, because if you know that you're scared or why you're scared, it may be easier for you to overcome something. I've always been very open to new opportunities and probably have made bigger leaps than I gave myself credit for at the time. So to me, moving from London to New York with subtitle, having never been to New York. So I agreed to take a job in New York, having never been. Not everybody is going to do that. I agreed to move out from a very comfortable role at a prestigious investment bank to go to a high growth tech company. A lot of people wouldn't choose to make that move. So I definitely have a higher risk tolerance than I think others might. I walked away from a job at a high growth tech company to start a business. And I think that comes back to sort of me just sort of believing that good things are possible and good things can come from pursuing things that sound exciting. I've never really believed that you should just carry on doing something because you've been doing it before. When I think that a lot of people get stuck and feel that what they're doing must be the right thing to do. So anchoring, a lot of people anchor, and I think anchoring can have its place, but also can also be hugely limiting. Timing is actually very important, and acknowledging and knowing when is the right time to make a move is probably critical. I recently was interviewing a very junior person who'd, I think, done 3 different jobs in 3 years and couldn't really describe to me why they kept moving. It just seemed to be because the next job sounded better. And I found that a real off-put for me personally, because I think sometimes you just have to do some of the hard graft. Like if you listen to some of the different themes that I just spoke to, 2 or 3 of the jobs I did were horrible. They were really challenging. There were high points for sure, but they were really, really challenging roles. And they've all added up to help me be able to make better decisions today. But if I had just walked away, I don't think I would have ever been able to get to where I am today. I think in terms of vision of success, you have to believe yourself. If you don't believe, no one will believe. You have to be able to see it. You have to know what you need to be successful. Do you need support? Who do you need support from? What resources do you need? Do you need a certain amount of money in your bank balance? Be realistic about what you need. And then do you have the relationships as well that can help you be successful? When I came to New York, there were I had two telephone numbers of people that I knew that lived in New York, but not people I'd spent much time with in years. But I made those calls immediately. And then luckily those people were very nice people and they became lifelong friends. Could have gone differently. You have to make the call. You have to know that people are going to be important to your journey and your happiness, and you have to pursue that. So those things that to me are sort of really important to anchor on and to think about if you do have key decisions to make. And I'm sorry because I probably just waffled on for half an hour. But why don't we turn over to Q&A and see if anybody has any questions around anything that I just mentioned.
Feel free to write on the chat or unmute your mics if you have any questions. I have one, if not to kick it off. Farouk. Yes, Farouk.
Okay.
Go for it.
Hello, my name is Farouk.
Hello, Farouk.
Yeah. I want to ask a question. What advice would you give to young recent graduates that are trying to break into the finance industry? It's a really tough world out there, so it might be challenging, but I would like to hear from your perspective. What's your best advice to breaking into the industry?
And are you thinking bigger company or smaller company, or do you have sort of a specific element that you're thinking?
To work for a bigger company, you've had an interesting portfolio. Your job career is so amazing, and so if I want to like follow that path, like what's
okay? So out of the gate, at the beginning, I would say it's literally getting your foot in the door. Whether that's leveraging any contacts that you have, whether that is you knowing you have a specific area of expertise that can get you the first position. It's all about getting the first position. Whether you need to take a contract job, doing something it's almost like it's all about getting your foot in the door, because once you're in the door, a lot of opportunities can present themselves, particularly if you're thoughtful, if you make sure that you do a good job at what you're doing. You can get, the beauty to me of big organizations is the ability to move around and the number of opportunities within a company. So it's all about sort of getting that first step. And obviously you don't want it to be so far off what you want to do, but it doesn't have to be the dream job. It just has to be a start point. So I'd really sort of recommend, again, it's like whatever it takes to get in the door is where you start.
Okay, that's a great answer. My second question is, what would you say is the best way to move forward? Like, is it networking or working on your skill set?
I think it depends. At different times in your career, I think each has a really good part. I think, as you could probably see from my career, I've always worked on my skills as well. So I think that you can't ignore that skill. But it's, as an example, if you decided you wanted to be a trader, once you have a trading seat, everything would be about your networking and relationship building, right? So it's almost like there's a certain amount of skill you need to get into a seat, and then to be really good in a seat, are there better and interesting ways for you to build within a seat? So I would say you always need to be pursuing both, but sometimes you're going to be putting your foot on the gas on one and sometimes on the other. But be deliberate about it. Relationships are always going to be critical. So sort of never completely give up on that. Never completely give up on skill building, but I don't think you always have to be pushing both. I think you have to know which one is most important at a certain time.
All right. Thank you.
No worries.
I also have a question. I hope it's not too irrelevant for the main subject. So, for example, what if you are thinking to start a business, but you realize that the place to start this business is not your hometown? At the same time, in your hometown, you have many opportunities from the business point of view because it's a still developing country. It's a city in a developing country. What would you do?
I would start with what you know. I would start where you are, where you see opportunity, and build from there. Because once you have built credibility in whatever it is the business that you do, and you have a client base, you can move and build. To build where you don't have that advantage, it will start by being so much harder. So I would say it's all about building from what you have.
Okay.
If it's a completely different business, then I think the big question for me would be, do you have the financial means to start that business somewhere else from scratch? But my gut reaction is absolutely to build from what you have, where you see opportunity immediately, and then think about what that transition or that growth opportunity is to do the second thing once you've established what you have in front of you.
Okay, thank you very much.
No worries. I can see something on the chat. So you said it's not important to stick to one thing if it doesn't work or pay well, the transition is good, right? And what skills are required for transition? So for me, I would have said, I haven't stuck to one thing, but I've spent enough time doing a thing to prove that I can do it. So I think that you shouldn't be transitioning every 3 months unless you really, really are completely desperate and unhappy in the work that you're doing. A lot of people would argue specialism ultimately gets you to higher paying, rewarded careers. I think of myself as a generalist, so having this sort of the number of overlapping and different experiences has sort of broadened and deepened my opportunity set by making me sort of a well-rounded generalist. But in terms of what skills are required for a transition, I think that's a really interesting question. I think it means you've got to be open, you've got to be looking for opportunity, and you have to go for it. You have to have confidence. If you don't, in a transition, if you are meek or reserved or hesitant, you may not be able to make the transition. Almost if you think of it as a leap of faith, where if you've got to really believe and you've got to make the leap. If you sort of hesitate or you half do it, you may not make it, or it might not work for you. You're welcome, Marcia. How did I build my consultancy business? Was it through friends and associates? So my first clients were all previous people I've worked with. I had that moment where I sort of went, how on earth am I going to build this business? And, it was like, well, I think I probably need to start by talking to people that I already know. It felt like an obvious start for me. So, I started having coffees when we used to do that pre-COVID. And I started having coffees and hearing about where people were at in their careers or their businesses, and mentioned that I might be available. And a lot of conversations led to conversations. Not all of them were immediate work. Not all of them led to a lot. One of the things that someone once said to me, which feels more American than I am naturally, is out of every meeting, make sure you have either another meeting lined up or a new contact. So always make sure that you're moving forward and building with every interaction you have. Never finish a call being like, thank you so much, because it has gone nowhere and you've really not sort of taken an opportunity. So I think that was a brilliant piece of advice, and it pushes me every time. Even in the meetings I have in my day-to-day now, I'm always aware of what I need to drive something forward, and that always means someone has something to do. Or a new person to meet, or a next deliverable. There should always be something that comes, unless it really is just an informational hello, which nothing needs to be. Okay, do you think that we should move on to the next section? Okay. So, leadership philosophy. As you may have sort of sensed, I spent a lot of time working with leaders, and I was always fascinated to think about who was good and why, and who wasn't. There were very few women in the seats of the people I was working with, particularly in a large investment bank. The range of leadership styles was extreme. I knew the leaders I gravitated towards were people that were thoughtful and warm and considerate, and in their decision making they used data, but they were practical. I worked for some tyrants. I saw some of the worst leadership skills, but I also think that I was calibrating over those years, working out what I thought was important. I don't think I look like a typical leader. I think that I would describe myself as someone that leads more from behind. I make sure no one, we all get to the end together. I don't need to be at the front, hence why I'm a COO, not a CEO. Is probably how I'd describe it. But I'm the best enabler, supporter, and driver of outcomes that I think I could be. And I listen to people. I think listening is probably is a superpower as a leader. And a lot of leaders are there to set vision, and others are to make it happen. If you want to bring people along, I think you need to understand people and what they think. And what I just wanted to share here is I'd read many leadership books. I studied business as an undergrad. I've always had a passion and an interest in leadership, as I'm sure many of you have. And this was one of the first sort of leadership concepts that really resonated with me. It was actually a lady that works at McKinsey. The concept is centered leadership. It's actually more focused on, it actually came from a set of work around female leadership, but to me, it's just a more inclusive and thoughtful approach to leadership. So it's called centered leadership. I thoroughly recommend it if you guys have any spare time to look into thinking about alternative leadership styles. But to me, this resonated on a different level to anything I'd seen before, and has sort of become a backdrop to me in how I think about and how I help support others in their leadership journeys. I won't go into the details because I think you can all read, and I think it's a book's worth of information, but it's to me was really important to find something that felt real to me. The other sort of fundamental thing that I just want to mention on leadership is the concept of authentic leadership. I think when I was first at UBS, I believed that everything had to be data driven, and I took a lot of my instincts out of my conversations and out of my thinking. And it took me quite a few years to actually sort of realize that my instincts were actually quite good and were very helpful. And I think that as part of my journey, I realized that it's more important to be yourself and to know yourself and to bring that to your work than to try and pretend to be what you think the job requires of you. And I think that that's what's really important to me there is that not everybody's always going to have the same approach as you. So sometimes that's going to cause friction, but being like who you are will ultimately lead to longer term success, although there may be more bumps in the road in the immediate term whilst you find the right place for you. So I sort of split this into two sort of sets of thinking. One is to recognize your own values. I think that introspection and self-evaluation and almost being able to check in and know where you're at are really important leadership skills, because ultimately to show up well for others, you've got to know what's going on with you. You've got to know who you are, and you've got to be able to calibrate that. So you have to understand what you need, what's important to you, what's need versus nice to have, and what's it going to take for you to be successful. And then you have to really be good at assessing the company or culture that you work within. So if it's a brand new company, you can obviously do that research through your interview process. Like check for warning signs. It sounds like almost a silly point to say, but a friend of mine was actually texting me before this because she's going through some interviews, and she said, I met this person and my interview with them was terrible, and here's like why. And, it's major warning signs. If someone makes you feel awful within an interview process, you sort of have to understand what might be going on, but that's not a good sign, which I'm sure you already would have figured out. How compatible are you? I know there's been there's stuff on Basecamp that's come out in the last sort of 36 hours, thinking about sort of how politics plays through work. I saw totally different reactions coming out of the Twitter sphere. Right, some are saying this is the best thing ever. Politics shouldn't be part of work. To politics, if it's who you are, it's deeply who you are. How dare they try to suppress that? Like, for some people, that would be a polarizing point where they could no longer consider working for a company. Understand that some companies are going to play it down the middle. Some are going to play on the edges. Understand what's important to you there. Are you going to be more comfortable navigating through something that goes down the middle because someone like, say, Coca-Cola or Pepsi, where they're so big and they service so many markets, they're probably never going to make huge overt statements? Or can you influence within an organization like that to try and help them do better? That context is critical to your success in the long run. What you can change, what you want to change, what you need have to come together, I think, for you to be successful in a leadership role in an organization. And then just briefly, I'm not sure how many of you already know what you want to be when you grow up, or if you think that the COO role is an interesting role. As I sort of joked with the team at the Geneva Business School, it's the number 2 role. It's the second in command. The CEOs, as we love them in society, are the visionaries. They're wonderful. They paint the picture. They sell what they dream of making happen. I've been lucky enough to work with many people that are those visionaries, and I love working with those people because they are so good at what they do. And when you think of what the role of a COO is, there's an old article which I remember from years ago, which I managed to dig out. It was in Harvard Business Review, and it's it's almost this concept of a misunderstood role. And when they break it down, it's quite a depressing read when you are a COO. But basically, they say every COO role is different. It's difficult to actually say when or if a COO is going to thrive. There's no single agreed upon description of what the job should entail. And basically, the CEO is the magnetic force, and the COO just has to figure the rest out. So if you want a depressing read, if you are in a role, this is the one for you. And what they do nice is frame the concept that there's 7 different types of COO. And I've listed them at the bottom, and they're not unique. You could be multiple of them. And what's funny to me is I agree with everything in the article, except the sort of real missing thing that if you find the right person to work with, being a COO to me is the best job in the world. So I feel very fortunate that I'm a COO. I think it is the best job. I get to help complement somebody and drive a business through to create something amazing. But it depends on who you are, finding the right person to work with. I've been lucky enough, as I say, to work with different people, and I think I'm slightly different, and maybe other COOs would say the same, but I'm naturally an enabler. I have a lot of different strengths. I'm very versatile. I think I could work with many different people in different organizations and in different situations. But the one I'm in today is very, very exciting, and we're going to talk a little bit about it, I think, before we wrap up. So any questions about leadership and being a COO?
I would like to know, for your recommendation to the students, what would be the most important thing for them to know, the essential thing about developing their own leadership, and what their leadership style would be, for example?
Yeah, so I think when I sort of talked about the authenticity, I think it's coming from a position of strength. So I'd almost say, if someone had that, the really terrible interview question, so what are your strengths? I think there has to start there. I don't think anyone should ever sort of think that they can magically invent new leadership skills. Like, it has to start from a base of either natural talent or learned skills that have been built up to be strong. So some people, storytelling, there are natural storytellers. You can learn to and advance your storytelling abilities. But I wouldn't say you should lead with storytelling unless you know you're already really good at it. And And I think I think leadership to me, again, is about bringing people with you. So everyone does that differently. Again, I think I do that through listening, through empathy, through building, through problem solving. And it's that combination. And I sort of pull that, I'm moving my hand forward because, again, that to me is how I slowly move everybody together along. Some people are going to stand at the front and make something sound so compelling that everyone's just going to run towards them because that sounds so good. That to me is a beautiful form of leadership. But sometimes, within the same organization, you need both. And, an example of that would be even in my current organization, the CEO might stand at the front and say, listen to this amazing thing. And half the team are like, that's the best thing I've ever heard. The other half have hesitation. They have fear. They have constraints that they see and challenges they see. My job is to work with them to work out how we all get to the same outcome. So I think the complementary skills of leadership are very interesting as well. And sometimes if you're already in a job or you're working with a leader that has certain leadership skills, what can be really great are two different things. One is to learn and emulate parts of their skills. I used to, when I was working with doing some leadership development work a few years ago, I used to sort of joke and say, imagine you've got a potato head. And with leadership, sometimes you can only be what you've seen. So think of all of the best people you've ever worked with, even if you haven't worked with them. Maybe it's people you've seen or heard from or read their books. And be like, I really like that piece. All right, I'm going to put that nose on. Okay, and I really like those ears. I'm going to put that bit on. Okay, that's my version of leadership. At least that starts you off. And then you've got something to work with. I think, and again, I think the more you can relate it to who you already are and what you have within your control, I think the more likely it's going to be successful. Did that answer your question, Paloma?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Wonderful. So Fanny, you posted the articles. Thank you so much. Right,
My pleasure. I'm going to read them.
Is leadership a gender-based role? Absolutely not. Is it expressed differently with gender biases? Yes. I think that you have people that can do all things. I think it's gendered, and people have expectations of what men and women can do and what they're good at. And I think my honest answer there is play to your strengths. So again, I'm a good listener and I'm empathetic. Is that understood more because I'm female? Yes. Is it seen as less strong because I'm female? Yes. So do I have to be strong in other ways? Yes. All right. Why don't we jump on quickly, because I think we're running out of time. The business of investing. So I thought very hard about how best to talk about the business that I work for. As it's an investment firm, I can't in any way advertise the company, which is obviously not what I'm doing. But I thought a really interesting concept to here would be to think about it as a business for a second, which it obviously is what it is. But often with investing, people just think about investing. Now, as I mentioned, I started my work with the company working directly with the research team, which is where all the investment decisions are made. I pride myself and I take great pleasure in thinking about how a company makes investments and making that a scalable and repeatable program, because that really is sort of the best you can be in the investment business. But sort of taking it back, like really stripping it back, the way I was thinking about it for this group here was you start with a risk reward assessment. Do you have the data? What are the bigger picture things that might be going on? And if you think about that in the life science industry right now, the macro factors that have come in the last 3 months alone have been huge. So we've had already some government messaging around price intervention that has had put a significant weight onto our industry. There is the concern on interest rates. There's concern around different COVID outcomes. There are tremendous headwinds that have really come up in the last couple of months. And you have to factor all of that into thinking about how you can continue to still move forward, be opportunistic and make money. What factors do you want to weigh put weight onto, and where do you want to really express your conviction? What portfolio constraints do you want to put on? And this one might be going into too much detail, but if you decide you will only ever invest 10% of your portfolio into one position as the most you will put in, you're also constraining your upside, but you're likely to never go out of business. How much of a constraint do you therefore want to put onto your portfolio? And again, there's hundreds and thousands of people that have researched this, and there's best practice, but are you aiming to be good at this, or are you aiming to be the best at this? And then how do you align your capital with your investment time horizon? That's something that we've been lucky to do, and is probably one of the keys to our personal success as a firm. Moving on, processes, system, and organizational design. How do you make this repeatable and scalable? How does your team communicate? How does your culture inspire and support investment team success? How does the rest of the organization support the investment team success? How do you ensure accountability for investment decisions? How do you maintain an alignment of interests? What tools do you have to do that? And then last but absolutely not least, talent. Talent is everything. This is a human capital business, both within the team that we build ourselves, and then also within the companies we invest in. We personally believe that we're putting bets onto the best management teams in the world. People are everything in our business. So how do you assess investment talent, both the ones internally and then the talent that you're investing in? What training and support do you offer your internal teams? How do you make sure they get up the learning curve as fast as possible? How do you decide who is going to be the best investor? Are they having a bad month, a bad year? Or are they just not very good at it? How do you keep a team to want to be doing this work? It's intense. It's hard. It's pretty relentless. The markets move all day, every day, so the job never ends. But those are the things I think about when I think about what we're doing to build out our organization. We currently have 34 people. When I started, we had 20. So I've pretty much grown the team now by over 50%. And we've still got a long way to go. But we're having a wild ride, and it's been a very exciting time. When I was talking to the Geneva team, they also thought there might be something fun here, which you guys might not or might know about. So as part of the business and how we've been thinking about it, last September, we actually decided to diversify our products slightly. And we did two things. We launched a private fund, which we hadn't had historically. We had a hybrid fund ahead of that time, for those of you that may be more finance orientated, which we opened and closed within 10 weeks. And we were incredibly successful in that fund launch. We also launched our first SPAC in conjunction with another fund. And we launched our second in February and our third in March. We also have already announced two mergers on the first two. So we've been incredibly busy. I think the first one was a $383 million SPAC with a $350 million pipe. The second was smaller. I think ended up being 250 and then 350 on the pipe. And then the third one we just launched was a $550 million SPAC. So I can't even add up the numbers right now, but I think we must be getting near to it's not going to be long till we've raised over $2 billion in the last 9 months. We've been working with incredible teams in the investment banks. We've been working with lawyers and accountants day and night to make these transactions happen. We're obviously very, very excited about the companies that we have chosen to partner with, and we're working on an ongoing daily basis with them. So it's been an incredibly busy time to both build an investment firm and also launch a whole new product suite, as you may think of it. So it's a very exciting seat to have been in over this sort of crazy time. And as you've probably seen, the SPAC market has had some challenges in the last month, but we've continued to sort of see the performance that we would hope for. So that's been very exciting. But now I really feel like I've been talking for far too long. So why don't I turn over to Q&A for any questions around the business of investing or the SPAC market, in case I can be helpful. I think I just saw a question come in. Okay, first one. Can you explain what a SPAC is? A SPAC is a special purpose acquisition company, also known as a blank check company. So the example of the first one, just to walk it through, is my company and a fellow hedge fund came together to basically raise a $350 million to buy part of a private company that we would then take public. So when you form the company, you actually launch with a public company and you have your ticker and that starts to trade. And then when you find an acquisition target, which is a private company, you announce that deal and then you spend the next 3 to 6 months working through the details of the merger agreement. When you finish that work, that company that you bought in its private capacity will become the public company. So it's some people would describe it as a backdoor IPO. We think of it as a really interesting way to secure significant capital raise, because you can likely secure more capital through a SPAC and a PIPE combined than you would be able to on a basic IPO offering. You also have some interesting abilities to have a different information profile than you do through an IPO process. And you also get, in this particular way that we've set it up, we've worked with a lot of long onlys and mutual funds to have the highest quality capital come into the vehicle that we are working on. So you're pretty much being able to partner with people that you think are going to be long-term capital for the company. So you're setting them up for more long-term success, and you're hopeful that you're going to have less market volatility in their first year or two because you have long-term capital partners. That was probably long-winded, sorry folks. How has your view on leadership changed as your career experience progressed? That's a great question, Fern. I think my naivety in my early days thought it was easier than it is. I think I have, when even just in thinking back to some of my early experiences, I think I used to sort of I'd basically go in with my deck and my Excels and say this is the answer, and to me the answer would be so obvious. And I think the nuances become more and more obvious to me now. So decisions are actually harder than they seemed. As a more junior member of staff, I had a limited amount of information, which made it really easy to make a clear decision. I think that the nuances of decisions, when you really have context and you understand all of the pieces and what that might mean both today, tomorrow, in the future, or the people it'll impact and how that works through, now is clearer to me. And I don't know if you can necessarily, I thought I could see it as well. I think sometimes I joke that you as your career goes on, things become more and more three-dimensional. So to me, it's very straightforward and it's a clear picture until you start to realize that the complexity and the layers that are there are actually a lot harder to decipher and work through than they may have been. So I think I have more respect for leaders and the challenge of decision making than I probably did when I was younger. You're welcome, Fern. Nijos?
Yeah, I'll ask a question.
Sure.
So, what if the person who starts a company is extremely good at what they do? For example, like a fashion designer, right? And he's really good at designing his clothes and like selling his brand, telling his story, but he's not very good at managing a business or leading people.
Yeah.
Yet he's like the CEO of the company. How should that be handled?
He either needs he needs a COO that can be his complement and doesn't need a title, who can basically do all those things. In particular, he needs somebody that can sell. The most important thing to have in a business is somebody that can drive the commercial side of a business. And what you described is someone with tremendous talent. Until that talent is in the hands of others, it's not a business. So it has to have somebody that can make it a business. And in the long run, you may get to the point where someone would be the creative director or the finance or the president and creative director. What you just described to me, I would probably say organizationally, I'd make it the creative director and president of the company is the brilliant fashion person. And I would probably say there needs to be a CEO.
Thanks.
Does anyone else want to ask anything on investing, on leadership, whatever it might be?
I guess I could ask a question. You are looking for analysts and associates. I was just wondering, what would make a candidate interesting for those types of positions?
Yeah. So I personally have interviewed many people, even in the last 6 months, for those roles. It's an incredibly precise profile that we're looking for. On the therapeutics team, which is where we do research on drug development companies, we're looking for somebody that has a deep scientific background, and deep, the least it can be is an undergraduate degree in a scientific capacity. Ideally, there's more than that. There's a master's, an MD, potentially a PhD, and then some experience in investing. On the life sciences side, we're less science heavy, but still would be looking for somebody that has a really good understanding of what's possible in the sort of molecular level of diagnostics, or some of the biochemistry that happens within that industry. And the reason that's so important for us is we believe in being at the forefront of the technology innovation. So what we're actually looking for right now are people to be doing the discussion and the digging to work out what that line is, or to have their own insights and ideas of what might come next. And that's not necessarily going to come from a generalist. I think in time there may be roles that we start to build out that are more about generalist sort of research and analyst roles. But in terms of the actual investment team, we're sort of currently building out our specialist sort of functions, which is very exciting, and is a very small pool of candidates as well. So it's actually a really hard search. I think I saw another question come in. How do you think technology data analysis has affected decision making? Do you think it is more easier to make a decision now? Yes and no. So I happily use my current role, even just to think that through versus sort of early on. It's easier to do data analysis in theory today than it was 20 years ago. There are better tools by far. There are more people with the skills to do so. There are more data sets available to buy. When it actually comes to decision making, people have to be wired to want to use data to make decisions, which to me is still one of the biggest hurdles to decision making. The best data-based decision making in theory would just literally say, well, the data says we go with A. And to me, data is still just an input into decision making. And at the moment, in the way that we're structured as a society and within business, I think it still needs to just be an input. I don't think you can categorically always know that the data tells you the right answer. As you all know as well, you can make data tell you any answer you want to if you're smart enough. So I think that it has a huge place in business. I love data. I own the data science team at Kasdan, and we're building that out. And we're very, very excited about the work we're going to do. But am I always going to listen to what the algorithm tells me we need to do? Not necessarily. Oh, that's an interesting question. So life sciences, just in case sort of anyone hasn't kept up, because I'm not sure. I got lost in my consulting days, and I just started working so hard I didn't really follow some of the bigger trends, and I was sort of looking at technology trends. And the life science industry is growing at a huge rate. And the way we describe what life science is, it's both the drug development that's happening mostly at a molecular level, so gene and cell therapy, and then all of the tools and the ecosystem that will support that development. So, and as well as diagnostic programs, and then the data and the sort of algorithms and the system and so the imaging technologies that are all sort of evolving and advancing as well. So if you actually break it down and you start to learn about the different elements of it, it's literally going to be this industry is going to have the biggest impact on life expectancy, disease reduction, of anything else in the world, from my perspective. And there are so many companies doing such interesting things to push those boundaries. This morning I was looking at a deck for a company that's working on cancer cells. We work with a lot of companies that are working on cancer. We work with companies that are working on different forms of brain dementia, on hardcore molecular diseases. So we're talking about literally improving people's quality of life or increasing life expectancy, which to me is the most unbelievable, amazing, exciting thing in the world. We happen to be obviously doing it by being financiers within that space. Our philosophy, though, is to work with companies, and hopefully the best companies in the world who have the best ideas, to execute on their ideas. So we're putting our bets on the people, and we want to support the people. And I think that's a really nice way to do business. I think some financiers just write checks, and we're a lot more than that. And if I compare that to my time at UBS as an example, I actually think I was excited there more about sort of the bigger picture of what the financial markets enabled, because a bank to me at the time was just more of an enabler of the capital markets. And I was curious, intrigued by what the capital markets were and how big they were, and really sort of the size and scale of what was possible. And then obviously saw that the massive impact of that not working out so well in 2008, and then it finding its feet again afterwards. So I just think they're just so different, but I truly am excited by the industry I'm in now in a way I don't think I ever have been in my career. So it's almost a sort of a newfound element to work for me, where the fundamental purpose of the companies we invest in has so much more reach than anything I could have imagined that I could work on, particularly without a science background. So I feel really honoured, actually. A number of the meetings I'm in, I sort of come away blown away, just being so honoured that I get to work with people that are doing incredible work. I mean, just as an example, we're building out a scientific advisory board, and I'm talking with some of the preeminent scientists in the world who have worked for 25 years on developing certain cell types or advancements in thinking about modifications of certain cells, who have already changed life course of millions of people by what they've been able to do. And it's hard not to be excited either before or after that call to know you're going to talk to that person and might get to, and my job is to try and get that person to work more closely with our team so we can help them find the next companies for us to invest in, which is pretty cool. How do you lead people in a business that finds itself in a pretty new industry? Well, this is what's quite interesting. Life science isn't actually that new. It was just very small and very niche. So my boss, his father was a life science investor over 20 years ago. So it has been there, but it really was specialized. And I think unless you had really a scientific perspective, it was small and sort of ignored. So really what I'd say almost to that question is, what's very exciting is being in an industry that has now got a huge spotlight shone on it. And a lot of that, I think, happened last year with COVID and people starting to really think about development of medicine and pay attention. I mean, I think someone sort of joked they've never been to so many they've never spent so much time talking to people who had strong opinions about development cycles, who never even knew what a development cycle was until, May last year, when everyone started talking about how fast a vaccine could be made. Everyone suddenly became, sort of couch experts on this subject. But there's been a lot of people working on this for a very long time, and it's almost like it's just become popular, which is very exciting. And I'm very excited to be working at the forefront of something that is a major inflection point, and I think will continue to be for the next decade or two.
Thanks for the answer. One more question. It's me, the one who asked the business in the new industry.
Yep.
Yeah, my question also, if I may extend, like for example, if you are trying to like you starting a business in the, I don't know, in the textile recycling industry, let's say like this, which is not necessarily very new, but not many people are doing it, and it's like 1% of the people of the clothes that are made are recycled. So we can say that this chapter is only beginning right now, let's say. And if you create this business or start a business in this industry, how do you lead people to see and believe in this vision, and to basically just be one of the first companies that are in this whole area?
Well, I think that I think you have to understand market trends and see where there's already traction and sort of try and jump in behind the slipstream of what's already working. I don't think you should try to be. I think I even saw an article this morning about Patagonia sort of championing how successful they've been with their recycling program. Like, you know, it's almost sort of revamped their business. So I'd almost, based on my reading this morning, without actually knowing or thinking about it for too long, I would have said it's trying to understand what is working already and try to work out what your take on that is. I think people are more and more interested in the concept of recycling. You have to understand what the barriers or limitations have been to its success before and try to overcome them. I think the fashion industry can be incredibly interesting, and a D2C option is obviously has become more of a thing in the last couple of years. I would look to have as many experts in the industry that you're looking to go into as possible as advisors, to try to help you overcome pitfalls that others have gone through before. So maybe it's not recycled fashion or recycled textiles, but I would encourage you to try to, again, if you were going D2C, you're trying to find someone that's already done D2C. How can you get some contractors or folks to help you on the marketing side there? Because I think everything's going to be about who you can get in front of, and highly targeted approaches to your market without wasting too much money, as well as, you know, obviously creating a compelling product that you can get to people within a reasonable amount of time. But distribution then becomes your next biggest challenge. And again, I'd look for advisors that have overcome distribution challenges before, have the connections to be able to get you the meetings, to be able to sort of, you know, get your foothold in to the right places to sell. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have a question. I want to know your position on emerging markets. What is your company's position on emerging markets?
We primarily work in the US, and we also have some investments in China. There's not, from what I can tell, a lot of the because we invest in companies that are doing such unique things. I think the most talented folks are coming from developing countries to the established centers to pursue this sort of work. So the best biologists coming to work at Stanford or MIT to do the work with the best in the world, to then do the spin out work. So I think there's a tremendous attraction to the educational centers, particularly in North America. And then with some of when the drugs become more established, the companies start to have global programs and think about rollout. But they're obviously working more where the commercial upside is highest. So America is almost always the first market they're looking to tap. Because of the size of the China's market, although the cost, the sort of revenue basis for many drugs in China is 10 times lower, is a tenth of the value. China is a very, very interesting market from scale, but it's not very interesting from price point. And I haven't seen much that really talks about the likes of India or sort of the African continents, to be honest, because so many of the drugs at the start point of their life are all going to be about immediate market traction. And just sort of clarify why, some of the drugs that we work on or that the companies we invest in will take between 5 and 8 years to get a drug that's ready to be injected into somebody in a hospital. So you invest to say $1 to $2 billion to create a drug to have it ready for its first patient. So then the immediate need is to try to recoup that money as fast as humanly possible to continue to create more drugs. So the most important first move is to get the highest possible price that you can for those drugs to recoup the research and development costs. And most of the drugs we look at and that we speak to are in like year 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, but they're not even commercial products yet. So they're not thinking hard about their emerging market strategies because they haven't really even worked out their basic home market strategy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes so much sense. Thank you.
No worries. Did I miss a question on the chat? From Nujosh, do people transition to science-related studies after graduating in business? Is it feasible or even worth it instead of just getting a job? To work in life science or therapeutic investing, I think that fundamental science knowledge is quite critical. I think suddenly trying to do 2 to 6 years of studying neurology at this point would probably be a huge task and maybe not the right path. I think it would be more about getting a job and looking for one that would allow you to start to specialize into life science investing from a more generalist perspective. I recently interviewed somebody that sort of was in a bigger fund where he was a life science investor and was being asked to become more of a generalist and was very unhappy with that thought. But bigger investment companies absolutely sort of do sometimes see analysts as a little bit interchangeable. Okay, so you're a good analyst, so you know if something looks good in the TMT market, you know if something looks good in this market or that market. So I think there is a world where you could be an analyst that has the ability to get to life sciences, but it's the particular sort of fund we are, and I think there's probably sort of a handful of us in the world that are in that similar spot where science background is almost is one key element. And the passion for it. I mean, the deep dive on the scientific literature is no mean feat. You've got to sort of love it to really understand the details. You've got to want to go to scientific conferences on your weekends. You've got to want to hang out with doctors and ask them every possible question about why something's going to work and why it's not. And if you haven't already studied science deeply, because it's like your number one subject, it's probably being a specialist life science investor is probably not going to happen. However, our CIO didn't study science as his primary. He was a business person first, but he learned about it through his father over a decade and built relationships with people and learned it. So it absolutely is possible. It's definitely a different path. Do you think one's cultural background would impact his or her chance of being in a leadership role? Well, my first answer is a cultural background should never impact someone's chance on becoming a leader. I think that different cultures, I think, have different appreciations of different strengths or styles of leadership. So even if I go back to the beginning where I said I really enjoyed the Swiss company leadership style, there were some downsides to Swiss leadership, but Swiss in general are straightforward, transparent, probably a little bit robotic, a little bit cutting. But I enjoyed that as a straightforward sort of operating model. In the US, people are probably more extroverted, are more storytellers, are more charming, are more inspiring. So culturally, even in those two countries as examples, I think as somebody from the UK in the US, I'm not as good a cultural fit to be a leader in the US because I'm not naturally a complete extrovert. I'm not naturally charismatic or a storyteller in comparison to the equivalent American. So I think that it's just knowing, again, it all goes back to knowing who you are and how that relates to the culture that you're looking to work in. And I think making sure that you calibrate and understand where your differentiation is an opportunity. 16, I got that about the Swiss from working for the company for 10 years. So that was my experience of working in a Swiss company. again, I enjoyed the Swiss culture a lot. I found a lot of Americans found the Swiss culture very hard.
It's very two-faced, if I can say. I'm a Swiss. I've lived here all my life, but I've always called it home, yet I've lived everywhere else as well. And there is some goodwill about Switzerland, which is totally erroneous, unfortunately. There's a very deep, dark side to the Swiss. But anyway, let it be. It's nice. Let's be superficial about this. But yeah, you could get me going for hours. It's not quite as clear-cut as that. Like it never is with any culture, by the way.
I think I see a question here from Hamid. What's the best way to grow a small or newly registered consulting company, like in 5 or 10 years? My personal experience was start with what you know, start with who you know, start with a couple of projects that can get you off the ground so that you can start to prove that you can add value. So you can start to have logos to be able to say, I've worked with this company and this company, and recently I did this piece of work. So you can start to work out if there's certain offerings that are scalable. Try and work out if you can almost generate a program. So as an example, I worked out that there are a number of high growth companies in New York who have new managers who don't yet know how to be managers. And a friend of mine was the lead of the HR lead. Again, over drinks, she was bemoaning how hard it was to, off the side of her desk, try to figure out what leadership program looked like for them. And I actually had done that before in my previous job, on the side of my job, because I really enjoy thinking about growing talent. And I said, I could build something. Can you spend a bit more time talking to me about the culture? Let's work out how that could work. And we worked out a program. And I think I did that I made modifications with every company, but I did that 3 or 4 times in different companies. And with each of those engagements, they also led to other things. So it's all about building and doing good work and then being asked to come back. The more repeat business, or if you can get retainer business, that's always really good, because then obviously you can pay your bills, which is always important, particularly when you're starting out. And I'd say if it's what do you need to be doing today, I'd just be making sure that you're building long-term relationships in all the work that you do, so that if you ever would like to, you can give somebody a call and say, hey, it's me, I'm doing this exciting thing, can I talk to you about it? And that wouldn't feel like a hard conversation to have. I think Paloma asked everybody to fill out the survey, so hopefully you've all seen that.
Yes, please.
Well, Sean has just said something very complimentary. One last question. How do you approach failure in life in general? What a wonderful question to end on. I think that you can't take it all too seriously. And when I say that, it's like, what is the worst that can happen? Do you still get to go home at night to see the people you like? Do you still got to see your friends? I think the worst failure would be to lose all those things. And that's what you need to make sure you don't do. So to me, failure in work or in your career, you could probably normally sort of really analyze it down to, was it the right fit for you? So just say it's a job that just goes terribly. Why does it go terribly? Is it you're the wrong fit? Is it that you're at the wrong point in your life to be doing that job? I think just really knowing what it is and why it hasn't worked. I think failure is also a really supercharged word. I think that every failure could give you your best learning that could ultimately be the thing that defines your life or your career. So I think failure, although it's a word that should be used and understood, I often think about failure as actually more of a reframing of huge learning opportunities. But again, that's probably the more optimistic side of me thinking out loud. And I'm happy to, Sean, if you disagree, you can tell me so. Oh, absolutely agree. Perfect. Well, look, I feel like that might be the right note to end on. Thank you, Fern. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time with me today. Very grateful for your attention, your questions, and for you letting me, take this virtual time with you all. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and great luck with whatever comes next for you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alex, for being here with us all today.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.